the forest on Zarnoff. 7 was darker than anything Mara had ever seen. Thick, alien trees stretched high into the sky, their black leaves blocking out most of the faint purple sunlight. Shadows twisted and danced across the uneven ground, and the air smelled of damp earth mixed with a strange metallic tang. Mara moved carefully, her boots crunching against the brittle undergrowth. Every sound made her pause. Was it just the wind, or was something following her? She had been sent alone to scout this part of the planet. Her mission was simple: observe the native life, gather data, and return safely. But something about this place felt wrong from the moment she landed. It wasn't just the darkness or the silence. It was a feeling of eyes watching her, waiting, calculating. Mara's hand brushed against a tree trunk, and she froze. A low, growling sound came from behind her. Her heart jumped. She spun around and saw nothing at first. Then, a pair of glowing eyes peeked from the shadows. She blinked and saw 2 more. Cubs, she whispered under her breath, recognizing the small predator forms. They were the size of a large dog, with sharp teeth and clawed paws, and their movements were quick and precise. Even though they were young, Mara knew better than to underestimate them. Predator cubs could be deadly, especially when hungry or cornered. Mara took a slow step back, trying to make herself appear calm. She had studied alien behavior before, and sudden movements could trigger an attack. But the cubs didn't retreat. Instead, they crouched low, their tails twitching, growls deepening. One of them bared its teeth and lunged fast. Mara barely managed to lift her boot, and it clamped down with a painful bite. She stumbled backward, heart pounding, as the small predator tried to drag her down. "Get off!" she yelled, kicking at it. The cub's teeth sank into the leather of her boot, but the boot held. She kicked harder, and with a sharp snap, the teeth broke against the reinforced sole. The cub yelped in surprise, backing away, but its siblings circled her like shadows. Mara realized that she had walked right into the cub's territory. She needed to move, but every step forward was a risk. The forest seemed to close in around her, branches snapping underfoot, roots tripping her. She glanced around and saw a small cave partially hidden by thick vines. It looked shallow, but might provide temporary shelter. She ran toward it, the cubs hot on her heels. Inside the cave, it was darker, colder, and filled with strange symbols etched into the walls. They glowed faintly in the dim light, pulsating like the heartbeat of the forest itself. Mara crouched, listening. The cubs prowled outside, growling and pawing at the entrance. She could hear them sniffing, trying to find a way in. Mara's mind raced. She was trained for situations like this, but the environment was alien. She didn't know how many predators were out there, or if a parent was nearby. One thing was clear. She couldn't stay still for long. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. She remembered the small tech kit strapped to her belt. It contained tools for scanning, emitting signals, and creating distractions. With trembling hands, she pulled out a small device and activated it. A high-pitched sound emitted from it. Filling the cave, she hoped it would confuse the cubs. Outside, she heard a momentary pause in the growling, followed by frantic scurrying. The distraction worked, but only for a moment. Mara knew she couldn't rely on gadgets forever. She needed to think like the predators. She studied the markings on the cave walls, hoping for a clue. Some of the symbols looked like traps, warning signs, or paths. Perhaps this cave had been used by other species before, and they had left hints. A sudden noise made her freeze. Heavy breathing, closer than before. Her heart thudded in her chest. Something larger than the cubs was moving outside. A predator parent. She realized with a jolt. The cubs weren't acting alone. They were hunting as a family. Panic threatened to take over. But Mara forced herself to stay calm. She couldn't show fear, not now. The predator outside made a low, rumbling growl. The ground trembled slightly with each step. Mara pressed herself against the wall, trying to make herself invisible. She thought about her mission, the data she needed to gather, and her duty to survive. This was more than just scouting. This was a test of everything she had learned. Suddenly, the cave shook as the predator outside pawed at the entrance. The cubs joined in, yipping and clawing at the walls. Mara realized that hiding wouldn't be enough. She needed to fight, or at least create a path for escape. She grabbed a jagged rock on the ground and held it tightly, ready to defend herself if necessary. The first cub leaped at her again, and she swung the rock, connecting with a sharp crack. The cub yelped and retreated. The others hesitated, unsure of what to do. Mara saw her chance. She dashed past them, boots slipping on wet moss, heart racing. She ran deeper into the cave, hoping it led to another exit. The deeper she went, the tighter the passage became. She had to crouch and squeeze through narrow gaps. Her breathing was loud in her own ears, echoing off the walls. The cubs were still outside, scratching and growling, but their parent had disappeared, or perhaps was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Mara didn't dare look back. Finally, she reached a small opening that led to a ledge overlooking a glowing alien river below. The view was breathtaking, but there was no time to admire it. She needed to climb down, using roots and rocks as footholds. The alien river glowed with bioluminescent light, illuminating her path. Every step was dangerous, but she moved slowly, carefully, and silently. Halfway down, a snapping sound made her freeze. One of the cubs had followed her, leaping onto a protruding rock. Mara swung her arm, and the cub tumbled backward with a startled yelp. She didn't stop to see where it landed. She had to keep moving to the bottom. She landed softly on the riverbank. The water was warm and strangely soothing, washing away some of her fear. But she knew she wasn't safe yet. The cubs were still around, and the parent predator could be anywhere. She needed a plan to get back to her ship, or at least find higher ground. Mara noticed a narrow canyon leading away from a river. The walls were steep but climbable, and it might give her a chance to hide. She followed it, every sense alert. Strange shadows moved along the rocks, but it was unclear if they were predators or simply the play of light. She couldn't afford to take risks. Hours seemed to pass as she navigated the canyon, her muscles aching, her body exhausted. She found a small alcove to rest, crouching behind jagged rocks. She checked her equipment. Scanners showed no immediate threats nearby, but the readings were erratic. Mara knew she couldn't let her guard down as night fell. The forest and canyon became even more alien. The glowing river cast eerie reflections on the walls, and every sound was amplified. She thought about the cub's teeth breaking against her boot earlier. It was a small victory, but it reminded her that even young predators could be deadly. She had to be clever, not just strong. Mara sat quietly, trying to plan her next move. She thought about the mission, about surviving, and about the unknown dangers still ahead. She knew this was only the beginning. The forest had already tested her, and she had survived, but at what cost? Her boots were torn, her body tired, and her mind racing. Yet she felt a strange thrill, a sense of determination she hadn't felt before. Somewhere in the distance, a howl echoed through the trees. It was not just the cubs this time. Mara realized that the predators were organized, intelligent, and patient. They would wait for her mistake. She had to be ready for anything. With a deep breath, she stood up. The night was far from over, and the unexpected turning point of her mission had only just arrived. Every step forward would test her courage, her wits, and her will to survive. She tightened her grip on her gear and moved silently through the canyon, knowing that danger lurked in every shadow. And somewhere in the dark, unseen eyes were watching, waiting, and learning. Mara moved quietly through the canyon, the glow of the alien river fading behind her. Every sound felt amplified, rocks shifting, branches brushing against one another, and the distant calls of alien creatures. She kept her senses sharp, remembering the predator cubs and their parent that had been hunting her earlier. The forest was no longer just unfamiliar. It had become alive with threats, and every shadow could hide a deadly enemy. Her boots were worn, but she pushed forward. She had to reach higher ground or risk being cornered by the cubs again. As she climbed a steep slope, her hands gripped rough rocks, scraping skin but providing essential support. Sweat ran down her forehead, and her breath came in short, controlled gasps. Mara's mind raced. She needed a plan, but the forest was unpredictable. Suddenly, she froze. The canyon ahead opened into a narrow clearing. Bioluminescent plants illuminated strange symbols carved into the stones, similar to the ones she had seen in the cave. They pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of the planet. Mara crouched low and scanned the area. She couldn't see the cubs, but she knew they were close. Predators rarely hunted alone, and their small size made them silent and difficult to track. A rustling sound came from above. Mara looked up just in time to see a small branch snap. One of the cubs had leapt down from a tree, landing silently behind her. She swung her arm, but the cub was fast, darting to side and letting out a sharp, frustrated yip. It circled her, teeth bared, claws digging into the ground. Mara could feel the predator's intelligence. It wasn't just instinct. It was calculating, watching for her weakness. She backed up carefully, keeping the cub in sight without turning her back. Her fingers brushed against her tech kit, and she pulled out a small device, a miniature flare emitter. She tossed it to the side, and a flash of light erupted, accompanied by a high-pitched sound. The cub yelped and retreated for a moment, giving Mara a chance to run. But the forest was unforgiving. She barely made it 20 steps before another cub blocked her path. Its fur bristled, and it growled low, showing its teeth. Mara realized that they were trying to herd her, corner her into a trap. The intelligence of these predators was frightening, even for cubs. She needed to think faster than they did. Mara spotted a narrow fissure in the rock wall, just wide enough to squeeze through. If she could reach it, she might escape the cubs. But the distance was tricky, and the cubs were quick. She bolted, dodging low-hanging branches, her heart pounding with adrenaline. The first cub lunged, but she sidestepped just in time. Her boot caught a root, and she tumbled, scraping her hands, but she rolled into the fissure. Inside, the passage was tight and dark. She pressed against the walls, tried to remain silent, listening as the cubs pawed and yipped outside. She could hear their frustrated growls echoing through the fissure. Mara's chest heaved, and she tried to calm her mind. She had survived so far because she stayed alert, stayed clever. Panic would be deadly here. The passage led to a small chamber, filled with strange alien technology. Small devices and panels lined the walls, glowing faintly. Mara approached cautiously, examining them. Some looked like control panels, others like communication devices. She activated a scanner, hoping to understand at least a little. The readings were fragmented, but one thing was clear. This technology could help her survive, if she figured out how to use it. As she studied the devices, a low rumble shook the chamber. Mara froze. The parent predator was here. She hadn't seen it yet, but she could feel its presence. The ground vibrated with each heavy step. Her mind raced. She couldn't fight it directly. It was too powerful, too fast, too intelligent. She needed a trap, a distraction, or a way to escape. Mara noticed a small vent in the chamber floor, leading to a narrow shaft. It might be risky, but it was her only option. She crawled into the vent, her body scraping against metal, dust filling her lungs. She paused to listen. The parent predator sniffed the air, growling low, frustrated at the absence of its prey. The cubs were still outside, pacing and whining. The shaft opened into a wider tunnel that sloped downward. Mara moved carefully, knowing one wrong step could be fatal. She could hear the cubs following her at a distance, their claws clicking against the tunnel walls. Her pulse quickened. She had to find a way out of this labyrinth before they trapped her completely. At the end of the tunnel, she found a ladder carved into the rock, leading to a higher ledge. She climbed cautiously, using every ounce of strength. When she reached the top, she could see the forest stretching out below. The river glowed faintly in the distance, but there was no sign of her ship. She was alone, high above the predators, but still in danger. Mara crouched behind a boulder, scanning the area. The cubs were circling below, but the parent predator had disappeared. For now, she could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken intelligence of the predators waiting for her next move. She had survived so far because she was clever, not just strong. But survival required more than cleverness. It required strategy. She examined her surroundings. The ledge connected to a series of narrow cliffs, forming a natural path toward the river. She could use the cliffs to move silently, staying out of the predator's line of sight. But the path was dangerous. One slip, and she could fall hundreds of meters. Every step would need precision, every movement calculated. Mara's hand brushed against a small device in her pocket, a tracker. She activated it, hoping to signal her ship. The signal was weak, almost unreadable. She needed to get closer to the river, where the terrain might allow her to send a stronger message. But getting there meant moving through open ground, exposed to the cubs and possibly the parent predator. A sudden noise made her freeze. A branch snapped nearby, and she saw a movement out of the corner of her eye. One of the cubs had found her ledge. It yipped and growled, pawing at the edge. Mara held her breath, watching its movements. The cub wasn't trying to attack directly. It was trying to hurt her again, to force her into a trap. Mara realized she couldn't wait. She needed to act. She looked around and saw a loose rock above the cub. Carefully, she pushed it, sending it tumbling down. The cub yelped, dodging at the last moment, but the noise distracted it long enough for Mara to slip past and continue along the ledge. She moved quickly, silently, using shadows and rocks to conceal herself. Hours passed as she navigated the cliffs. The forest below grew, quieter, but she knew better than to trust the silence. Predators were patient, and the parent could be waiting anywhere. Her muscles ached, her body screamed in exhaustion, but she forced herself to keep moving. Survival depended on perseverance, not speed. Finally, she reached a narrow bridge of natural rock connecting two cliffs. Below, the river glowed like liquid fire, illuminating the alien forest. She paused, taking in the sight, but there was no time to rest. She had to cross carefully. The bridge was slippery, uneven, and exposed. One wrong step, and she could fall into the glowing river below, with unknown dangers waiting in its depths. Mara took a deep breath and began to cross. Each step was deliberate, measured, her eyes scanning for movement below. She could feel the tension in every muscle. Halfway across, a shadow darted from the side, a cub, leaping with terrifying speed. Mara stumbled but caught herself, using a jagged rock for support. The cub landed on the bridge behind her, yipping in frustration. She didn't look back. She focused on the other side, moving faster, carefully but steadily. Finally, she reached the far edge and scrambled to safety, her chest heaving, sweat and dirt covering her. She paused for a moment, listening. Silence. For now, she had escaped. But Mara knew this was only temporary. The cubs and their parent were intelligent, and the forest was vast. Her mission had taken a deadly turn, and the unexpected danger of Zarnoff 7 had only just begun. Somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes were still watching, waiting for her next mistake. Mara pressed on, determined. She had survived the first hunt, but the predator's shadow would follow her, always. And she knew one thing for certain. On this alien world, survival was not guaranteed, and every step forward would test her courage, her wits, and her will to live. The forest of Zarnoff 7 was alive in ways Mara had not expected. Every rustle, every shadow, every faint shimmer of bioluminescent light made her heart pound faster. She had escaped the cubs for now, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they found her again. Or worse, the parent predator that stalked from the shadows. She moved cautiously along the cliffside, every step calculated, her eyes darting from one dark corner to another. The river below glowed faintly, a soft orange light reflecting off the slick rocks. Mara's boots slipped slightly on the damp surfaces, and she cursed under her breath. The forest was dangerous enough in daylight. In the half-light of dusk, it became a labyrinth of lethal surprises. She paused behind a large, jagged rock, catching her breath and trying to calm her racing heart. Then she heard it, the low, menacing growl of the parent predator. Not far away, the cubs yipped, their playful sounds twisted into a terrifying rhythm that hinted at strategy, not instinct. Mara realized with a chill that the predators were coordinating. They weren't mindless animals. They were intelligent hunters, learning from every movement she made. Her hand went to the small tech kit at her belt. She activated a tiny scanning device, sending pulses into the surrounding area. The readings were alarming. Multiple heat signatures moving through the forest, some very small, some massive. The cubs and the parent predator were closing in. Mara's mind raced. She had survived encounters before, but this was different. Every mistake could be her last. She needed a plan. Running blindly would only make her tired and cornered. She glanced at the cliff edge, seeing a narrow path leading deeper into the forest. It was risky, but it offered cover: thick alien plants, twisted roots, and glowing vines that could mask her movements. Mara took a deep breath and moved forward, silent and precise. As she stepped carefully over a moss-covered root, one of the cubs lunged from the shadows. It was faster than she expected, its teeth snapping mere inches from her leg. Mara kicked it aside with all her strength, sending it tumbling back into the undergrowth. But more cubs were coming, and their yips became a chorus of menace. She had no choice but to keep moving. The forest floor was uneven, littered with fallen branches and alien debris. Mara's legs burned from the constant sprinting and climbing. She forced herself to keep her mind sharp, scanning for traps, pitfalls, or signs of predators. Then she saw it. A faint shimmer along the ground, a line of alien markings almost invisible in the dim light. Mara crouched to examine them. They weren't random. They were tracks. Someone or something had been here before. Following the tracks carefully, she realized they led to a small clearing. Her heart sank as she saw signs of recent activity: claw marks on trees, broken branches, and remnants of old prey. The cubs had brought her here deliberately, using the forest itself as a trap. Mara's instinct screamed at her to turn back, but there was nowhere to run. She had to think, not just react. She spotted a pile of rocks and fallen logs near the center of the clearing. Quickly, she formulated a plan. If she could create a diversion, perhaps she could slip past the cubs and the parent predator. She grabbed a rock and hurled it into a dense patch of alien vines, the crash echoing through the clearing. The cubs reacted immediately, racing toward the sound, yipping and growling. Mara didn't wait. She dashed toward the other side of the clearing, using every tree, vine, and shadow to hide her movement. The parent predator emerged suddenly, taller than she had imagined, its fur bristling, eyes glowing in the dim light. It sniffed the air, growling low, a sound that vibrated through Mara's chest. Her pulse raced as she realized how close she had come to death. She ducked behind a thick vine and activated another device from her kit, a tiny flare that emitted smoke and noise. The parent predator hesitated, confused by the sudden distraction. Mara used the opportunity to slip past, moving faster, her legs carrying her through the alien undergrowth. Every movement was calculated, but exhaustion began to creep in. She could feel her muscles tightening, her breathing coming in sharp gasps. Hours passed as she moved deeper into the forest. The cubs had slowed, probably regrouping, but the parent predator was still nearby. Mara needed higher ground, somewhere she could see the forest around her and plan her next move. She spotted a rocky incline ahead, a cliff that led to a plateau overlooking the river and forest. It was dangerous, steep, and narrow, but it was her best chance. Climbing the cliff was grueling. Her hands scraped against jagged rocks, and her boots slipped on loose gravel. Every sound echoed through the canyon, and Mara knew the predators were listening. Halfway up, a cub leaped from a hidden ledge, claws extended. Mara twisted and rolled, narrowly avoiding the attack. The cub yipped and fell back, momentarily stunned, but more were coming. Finally, she reached the plateau. The view was breathtaking and terrifying. The forest stretched endlessly, dark and alive, with glowing rivers and strange plants casting eerie light. Mara pressed herself against a boulder, panting, surveying the terrain. She realized the parent predator hadn't followed her up. Perhaps it was waiting, learning, strategizing. She knew this hunt was far from over. On the plateau, Mara noticed something strange. Faint markings in the soil, not made by claws or feet. They were geometric, almost like symbols. She crouched to examine them. Could they be alien warnings, traps, or remnants of an ancient civilization? Mara didn't have time to ponder. She needed to focus on survival. But she made a mental note. These symbols might be important later. The cubs appeared below, circling the base of the cliff. Their yips echoed, sharp and menacing. Mara could see them clearly now, their small teeth gleaming, eyes intelligent and alert. They weren't just hunting. They were playing, testing her, learning her movements. It was a terrifying kind of curiosity. Mara knew she needed a plan to escape the plateau and reach the river safely. She spotted a natural bridge of rock leading to another cliff. If she could cross it carefully, she might gain distance from predators. But the bridge was narrow, slick with moisture and exposed. Every step would require balance and precision. She moved slowly, one foot in front of the other, heart pounding. Halfway across, a cub leaped onto the bridge, claws scraping dangerously close. Mara stumbled but caught herself, sliding slightly but not falling. The cub hissed, frustrated, and retreated to the edge. Mara held her breath, continuing across the bridge, each step a battle between fear and determination. On the other side, she finally found a small alcove, a safe spot to rest briefly. Her body ached, her hands were raw, and her boots were battered, but she had made it further than she had imagined. She checked her equipment. Nothing broken, no immediate danger, but she knew the hunt was far from over. As night fell, the forest grew darker, shadows lengthening and twisting in the dim light. The cubs were still out there, waiting. Mara could hear them faintly, moving through the trees, communicating with soft yips and growls. She pressed herself against the wall of the alcove, exhaustion threatening to overtake her. She had survived so far because of her wits and agility, but the parent predator was still out there, a silent shadow, learning, waiting. Mara closed her eyes briefly, forcing herself to think. The hunt had escalated. What had begun as a simple scouting mission had turned into a test of survival against predators far smarter and more dangerous than she had imagined. She knew she couldn't outrun them forever. She had to outthink them. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard a rustle, faint but deliberate. Mara's eyes snapped open. The parent predator had found her again. She could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze, the silent menace in every movement. She gripped her tools tighter, ready for the next encounter. She knew that tonight, the forest would decide whether she lived or became prey. And somewhere in the shadows, unseen eyes watched, calculated, and waited for the perfect moment to strike. Night had fully descended over the alien forest of Zarnoff 7. The bioluminescent plants cast a ghostly glow over the twisted trees, painting everything in shades of blue and green. Mara crouched behind a jagged boulder on the plateau, her chest heaving, her muscles screaming in exhaustion. The hunt had escalated, and she knew the predators were learning from every step she took. Below, she could hear the cubs moving, yipping softly, a subtle rhythm that spoke of intelligence. They weren't mindless. They were strategists, playful hunters studying her patterns. Somewhere further back, the parent predator stalked silently, a shadow blending with the dark, waiting for her to make a mistake. Mara pressed her back against the rock, feeling the chill of the night. She needed a plan, but time was running out. Her eyes scanned the terrain. Across the plateau, she noticed a narrow ledge that connected to a series of ancient ruins. The structures were half buried, alien in design, and marked with glowing symbols similar to those she had seen before. Mara realized that these ruins might be her only chance for survival. If she could reach them, she could use the terrain to her advantage, set traps, and perhaps even escape. But the path was treacherous. Below the ledge, the cubs prowled, their small eyes glinting in the faint light. Mara knew they would detect movement if she wasn't careful. Every step had to be deliberate, every breath measured. She crouched low and began moving, careful to avoid the loose rocks and moss that could give her away. The cubs spotted her almost immediately. One leaped onto a lower rock, snapping its teeth in frustration. Mara froze, letting it pass, then slipped forward, using shadows and the uneven terrain to conceal herself. She could feel her heart pounding in her ears. One wrong step could bring her down into the predator's waiting jaws. Halfway across the ledge, a snapping sound echoed behind her. She spun just in time to see the parent predator emerge from the shadows. Its massive form blocked part of the path, fur bristling, eyes glowing with intelligence and rage. Mara's pulse jumped. This wasn't just a hunt. It was a test, a challenge from a creature that was learning her every move. She glanced around desperately and spotted a cluster of alien vines hanging from a nearby cliff. An idea formed. If she could lure the parent predator toward the vines, she might be able to trap it temporarily. But executing it would be dangerous. She had to move carefully, and one misstep could be fatal. Mara dropped a small stone to the side, hoping to draw the cubs away. It worked. The cubs leaped toward the noise, leaving the parent predator momentarily focused on her. She crept toward the vines, heart racing. Her hands gripped the thick strands, pulling them down just as the predator lunged. She jumped aside, and the vines swung up, tangling around the predator's legs. It yipped in surprise, thrashing violently but unable to reach her. Breathing heavily, Mara took a moment to catch her breath. The predator struggled against the vines, but she knew it wouldn't be trapped forever. She had only bought herself a few minutes. The cubs would return, and the parent predator would adapt. She needed a more permanent plan, or a path to escape. She turned her attention to the ruins. The ancient walls were covered with symbols that seemed to glow brighter in the predator's presence. Mara had no idea what they meant, but she hoped they could be used to her advantage. She moved carefully, stepping into a corridor formed by crumbling stone. The air inside was cooler, and the shadows deepened, providing cover. The predator finally freed itself from the vines with a violent shake. Its roar echoed through the ruins, shaking loose small stones and sending dust drifting through the air. Mara pressed herself against the wall, barely daring to breathe. The cubs followed, circling the entrance. She realized she needed a distraction, something to delay them while she found a way to escape the ruins. Her eyes fell on an old alien device embedded in the wall, a panel with glowing nodes and levers. Mara didn't know what it would do, but desperate times demanded desperate measures. She pulled a lever, and the device hummed to life, sending a burst of bright light and a low-frequency vibration through the ruins. The cubs yipped and shrieked, retreating slightly, confused by the sudden change in their environment. The parent predator roared in frustration, its massive form pressing against the corridor entrance. Mara knew she had to act now. She grabbed a heavy stone from the ground and hurled it toward a distant wall, creating another noise to distract the predator. It lunged toward the sound, giving her a narrow window to slip through the ruins' twisting corridors. Inside, the passages were labyrinthine, filled with turns, alcoves, and hidden spaces. Mara used every ounce of her training to stay silent, moving quickly but carefully. The predator's roar echoed behind her, but she didn't dare look back. She had learned by now that the predator could anticipate her movements if she revealed herself too early. After what felt like hours, she found a narrow stairway carved into the stone, leading to a higher platform. She climbed cautiously, muscles straining, breath ragged. At the top, she emerged onto a flat rooftop of the ruins, overlooking the forest below. The view was both beautiful and terrifying. The forest stretched endlessly, glowing rivers cutting through like veins, and shadows moving the distance, always watching. Mara took a moment to survey her surroundings. The cubs were regrouping below, their small forms darting between trees. The parent predator was still near the ruins' entrance, pacing and growling. She realized that brute force wouldn't save her. She had to outthink them, use the environment, and plan her next moves carefully. Her eyes scanned the ruins. She noticed a large chamber below, its entrance partially hidden by vines. If she could lure the predators into that chamber, she might be able to trap them or at least create a barrier. She needed bait, and fast. Mara grabbed a piece of her torn boot, dangling it over the edge as a lure. It worked. The cub spotted it immediately, yipping and rushing toward the chamber. She moved quickly to a side passage, keeping out of sight of the parent predator. It had not yet noticed her maneuver. As the cubs entered the chamber, Mara heard them yipping and growling in confusion. She peeked through a narrow slit in the wall and saw that they were momentarily trapped by the ruins' architecture. The parent predator roared, but could not follow without risk. Mara smiled grimly. She had bought herself more time, but the hunt was far from over. Exhausted, Mara pressed herself against a stone wall, trying to catch her breath. She had survived the parent predator's first act of engagement and had managed to trap the cubs temporarily. But she knew this was only a brief reprieve. The forest was alive with danger, and the predators were patient. They would wait, observe, and strike when she least expected it. Mara's mind raced. She needed to find a permanent way to escape the forest, or at least a way to gain an advantage over her pursuers. The ancient ruins held secrets. She was sure of it. Symbols glowed faintly in the shadows, perhaps hinting at traps, weapons, or hidden passages. She had to decipher them before the predators adapted. A faint noise behind her made her freeze. Something moved silently, almost imperceptibly. Mara's hand went to the small blade at her belt. The parent predator had found another path, one that led directly to her position. She could feel its presence, the weight of its gaze, the anticipation of the hunt. She pressed herself flat against the stone, holding her breath, hoping to remain unseen. The predator paused, sniffing the air, listening. Mara counted slowly to 5, then another 5, her pulse racing. It moved on, at least for now, but she knew it was only a matter of time before it returned. She needed to be ready. Every step, every decision could mean life or death. Mara's eyes fell on a faint glow at the far end of the ruins. It looked like a control panel, possibly another device similar to the one she had used earlier. If she could activate it, perhaps she could create a more permanent trap or signal for help. She moved cautiously, every sense alert, every muscle tense for action. As she reached the panel, the cubs yipped and clawed at the chamber behind her. The parent predator roared in the distance. Mara's heart pounded, but she forced herself to focus. She activated the device. A hum filled the ruins, followed by a series of glowing barriers appearing along the corridors. The cubs were temporarily trapped, their yips turning into frustrated squeals. The parent predator hesitated, unable to advance without risking injury. Mara allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had survived the predator's snare, at least for now. But the forest of Zarnoff, 7 was vast, and the hunt was far from over. She knew that when the predators adapted, she would need to be ready with an even cleverer plan. Night pressed on, deep and silent, except for frustrated yips of the trapped cubs and the distant growl of the parent predator. Mara pressed herself against the wall, exhausted but determined. She had survived the first full engagement with the predators and had gained a small advantage, but the unexpected turning points were far from finished. Somewhere in the dark, unseen eyes were still watching, waiting, and learning. Mara's hands clenched her tools. She had survived the snare, but she knew the final confrontation was approaching. Every shadow could hide death. Every sound could signal a new threat, and every step forward could be her last. The forest of Zarnoff, 7 had tested her, and she had survived, but the ultimate challenge still lay ahead. The ruins of Zarnoff, 7 lay silent under the alien night sky, but Mara knew the silence was a trap. Every shadow, every faint glow of bioluminescent plants could hide the predators. She pressed her back against a stone pillar, breathing shallowly, trying to calm her racing heart. The cubs were temporarily trapped in the corridors she had sealed with the alien device, yipping and clawing in frustration. But the parent predator was still out there, stalking, calculating, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Mara's body ached. Her hands were scraped, her boots torn, her muscles screaming from the previous nights of running and climbing. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she felt a fierce determination. She had survived this long by thinking faster than her predators, using strategy over strength, and now it was time for the ultimate test. She scanned the ruins. Ancient alien symbols glowed faintly along the walls, almost as if they were alive. Mara had seen enough patterns by now to realize that the ruins were not just old. They were designed for defense, traps, and possibly even weapons. She needed to use them. She traced a path along the walls, looking for mechanisms or controls. Her fingers brushed a smooth stone panel, and it responded to her touch. A hidden section of the wall slid open, revealing a narrow corridor lined with strange devices. Mara's mind raced. If she could lure the parent predator into this corridor, she could use the devices to her advantage, perhaps create barriers, distractions, or even traps strong enough to hold it temporarily. She set her plan quickly, bait, lead, and strike. The predator would follow, and she would use the environment to survive. She stepped lightly toward the main courtyard of the ruins, keeping to the shadows. Her heart pounded as she moved closer to the trapped cubs. She grabbed a small rock and threw it toward the corridor exit. The sound echoed, bouncing off the walls. Immediately, one of the cubs yipped and darted toward it, followed by the others, still trapped but attempting to find a way out. The parent predator roared, a deep, menacing sound that vibrated through the ruins. Mara froze. Its massive head emerged from the shadows, eyes glowing with intelligence and rage. It had learned her tricks and was no longer playing. It wanted her dead. She ducked behind a pillar, holding her breath, feeling the ground vibrate with every step it took. Then, She saw her chance. The corridor she had discovered earlier led to a chamber filled with alien mechanisms. Panels, levers, and glowing rods. If she could lure the predator in, she could activate the devices to trap or disable it temporarily. Mara edged forward slowly, careful not to alert it. Her pulse hammered in her ears. A sudden movement behind her made her spin. One of the cubs had freed itself from the previous trap. It lunged at her, teeth snapping. Mara sidestepped, kicking it into a wall. It yipped and scrambled to its feet, then darted toward the corridor, curious. The parent predator's roar grew louder, closer. Mara knew the plan had to work. There was no room for error. She dashed toward the corridor, her boot skidding on the stone floor. The parent predator followed, its massive frame moving with terrifying speed and precision. Mara reached the chamber and slammed a lever. Panels slid into place. Glowing rods lit up, and a barrier activated, momentarily blocking the predator's path. It roared, slamming against the barrier, but Mara didn't hesitate. She ducked into a side passage, heart racing, and moved deeper into the ruins. The predator's growls echoed behind her, deafening in the narrow passages. The cubs yipped from the trapped corridors, confused and agitated. Mara knew she couldn't free herself without neutralizing the threat completely. She needed one final strategy, a way to end the hunt or escape for good. She reached a large central chamber, the ceiling high and open to the alien night sky. Strange alien machinery stood in the middle, humming faintly. Symbols glowed on the floor, forming a pattern she recognized, a trap or a defensive mechanism waiting to be activated. Mara's instincts screamed at her. She had to use it, but she had no idea what it would do. There was no choice. The parent predator entered the chamber, its massive form filling the space. Mara ducked behind a pillar and waited for the right moment. She threw a small rock to the side, drawing its attention. The predator turned, eyes glowing, sniffing the air. Mara pressed a lever on the machinery. A bright light flashed, energy surged, and a barrier formed around the predator, enclosing it in a shimmering field. The predator roared and slammed against the energy barrier, but it was trapped, unable to reach her. The cubs, still confused and partially trapped, watched from their corridors, yipping in frustration. Mara exhaled slowly, relief flooding her body. She had outsmarted them. For now, she had survived. But Mara knew this wasn't the end. The predators were intelligent. They would remember, learn, and adapt. She needed to escape the forest and signal her ship before they regrouped. She moved quickly, checking the alien machinery for a control panel that could guide her toward a hidden exit. Her fingers traced the glowing symbols until she found a panel that responded to her touch. A hidden pathway opened, a tunnel leading away from the ruins and back toward the river. Mara sprinted through the tunnel, careful to avoid loose rocks and pitfalls. The forest outside grew darker, but she could see the faint glow of the river ahead. She had made it. Almost. Her muscles ached, her lungs burned, but adrenaline pushed her forward. She reached the riverbank and paused, scanning the water for dangers. The river shimmered, bioluminescent light, reflecting off the surface, revealing no immediate threats. She activated her tracker, sending a signal to her ship. A faint hum responded, a weak signal, but enough. She had done it. She had survived the predators, outsmarted them, and found a way to call for help. She allowed herself a brief moment of relief, closing her eyes and letting her body relax. Then she heard it, a faint growl from the forest edge. Mara's eyes snapped open. One of the cubs had survived, crouched low in the shadows, eyes fixed on her. She tensed, ready to defend herself if necessary. But the cub hesitated, then turned and ran back into the forest. Mara realized something. The predators had respect for her now. They had learned she was clever, dangerous, and not to be underestimated. Mara breathed deeply, feeling a sense of triumph. She had survived the predator hunt, navigated the alien forest, and discovered the secrets of the ruins. She was battered, exhausted, and scarred, but stronger, wiser, and more confident than before. The hunt had tested every skill she possessed, every ounce of her courage, and she had passed. The forest of Zarnoth. 7 was still alive, still dangerous, but Mara had survived its greatest threats. She turned toward the river, ready to signal her ship and finally leave the alien planet. The cubs and their parent were still out there, watching, waiting, but for now, Mara had outsmarted them. As she activated her tracker fully, a bright light from above signaled her ship's arrival. Mara allowed herself a small, victorious smile. She had survived the predators, outsmarted the ancient ruins, and lived to tell the tale. Yet, deep in the forest, shadows shifted. Mara knew that Zarnoff, 7 held many more secrets, many more challenges. But for now, she had survived the hunt, outwitted the predators, and proven her strength. The unexpected turning points of the alien forest had tested her, and she had emerged victorious. And somewhere in the darkness, unseen eyes still watched, learning, waiting for the next prey to enter their territory.